How to buy a home part 1. If you're a first home buyer, this series is for you. Keep watching. Today we're going to be starting here with finance, but I've actually turned my entire wall into like an explainer board, and there's so much more to come. So be sure to follow along so you don't miss any of the series and you know exactly how to buy your first home. If this is the first video you're seeing of mine, my name's Emily. I'm a buyer's advocate. I know all about buying houses. Let's get into it. Now, with the finance here, the money, I have broken it into 2 parts before we head on to the next step. And there's a good reason for that, because there's kind of 2 options when you're going forward to obtain finance for your home. And when I say finance, I mean getting a mortgage, getting a loan to actually be able to have the funds to buy the property. So with step 1, we've got the representation of the banks up here with this arrow, where some people actually might go around individually to each branch and shop each bank to get the best rate. And I've put a little sticky note here that says, talk about credit score, because when you go and you personally individually shop all the banks and you submit for a pre-approval, you need to be aware that in some cases it can put a mark on your credit score because you've made multiple inquiries on your credit account. Option 2 is this area here, which is a representation of mortgage brokers. So you might be familiar with some of these names: MoneyQuest, Aussie, Loan Market, Mortgage Choice. They're just some of the examples of mortgage brokers that you can come across. Now, there's something really important you must be across when it comes to mortgage brokers. They must be a member of either of these associations, either the FBAA, which is the Finance Broking Association of Australia, or the MFAA, which is the Mortgage and Finance Association of Australia. Basically, these associations make sure the brokers stay up to date with best practice and ensure a good experience for the clients, which is you. Now, would I go bank or would I go broker? Look, the answer is I personally would go for a mortgage broker, and here is the reason why. Remember before I was talking about if you shop around the banks yourself, you might get a little mark on your credit score for too many inquiries. The reason I would personally go with a mortgage broker is because they have multiple lenders on their panel. Some of them have 40 plus lenders. The broker actually assesses your situation first before any paperwork is submitted to the lenders, and avoiding the mark on your credit score. A good broker will give you 3 or 4 lender options. And when I say lender, I mean a bank. They'll give you the rates and any of the charges that are applicable and make you aware of what your options are when it comes to obtaining finance. I'm going to need part 2 for the next important step within finance, so follow along to find out more. And if you found this content helpful, please like it so more people see it. I would really appreciate it.
3 things I want every first homeowner to know. As a certified practicing valuer inspecting about 15,000 properties, $12 billion worth of real estate, this is what I've learned doing many valuations for first home buyers. Your first home is probably and very most likely not going to be your last home. So don't get too caught up in the emotion of buying that first home when it's probably only going to be statistically your home for 5 to 8 years. Think strategically. Yes, it's your principal place of residence, but because you're statistically only going to hold it for 5 to 8 years, think of it like an investment property. Yes, you're living in it, but think of the capital growth, so then when you do upgrade, that home has appreciated in value and it's a stepping stone to your next home. And in my experience as a valuer, I see a lot of first home buyers overcapitalizing on that first purchase. Oh, it's my home, I've worked hard for it, I deserve it. You do, but it's probably not going to add as much market value as you think, so be smart.
Do not even think about buying a property before doing this one simple thing. The buyer of this property forgot to do it and they lost $70,000. So on the weekend I went to the open home for this property as my mum is downsizing, and the first thing I asked the agent was, who owns the property? Are they a landlord? Do they live in it? And he told me that the property was actually purchased. The buyer put down their 10% deposit, but they couldn't get the finance. So they believed that they could afford a $700,000 property, but they weren't approved by their mortgage broker. And even if they were, they didn't have the subject to finance in the contract of sale. This is a must-have when you buy any property, because if you don't have it, you risk losing your deposit, which is exactly what happened to the purchaser of this property.
Here's 5 things I wish I knew before I started house hunting for myself. as a first-time homebuyer who's also a full-time realtor. First of all, everyone knows you have to get your pre-approval, but also it's super important to get your total estimated cash required to close, because closing costs are no joke. And it's not as simple as calculating 5% down of a purchase price and that's your down payment and that's it. Sometimes your closing costs can be almost as much as your down payment. Your lender or your realtor will be able to help you with that. Second thing that's super important is to have your lender and or your realtor estimate your total monthly payments for a property that you're interested in before you even go see it, because you might be pre-approved up to a certain amount, but then when you see the monthly payments, including principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, and PMI if that's required, you might have a heart attack. On paper, you might be able to afford a certain number, but then when you actually break it down and see what it's going to cost you monthly, you need to be comfortable with that number. Also, HOA fees if you're looking at a property that has an HOA. 3, if there's a specific neighborhood or property that you're interested in, I would highly recommend driving through that neighborhood during specific times of the day. For example, I just showed a house that had a school at the end of the street, so you need to know if that pickup and drop-off line is going to be blocking your driveway. 6 p.m. when everyone's home from work, you'll see if it's an active community, if there's people with dogs. Same goes with Saturday afternoon. And at least here in South Florida, we have churches like randomly sprinkled into neighborhoods sometimes. So I would recommend Sunday mornings just so you can see where people are parking, if they usually park on the street, in front of your house, in front of your lawn. These are things that you need to know about a certain area before you buy a house there. Number 4, price out different options to keep in mind. You might think that you want something turnkey, but then pretty much every house you go into is gonna have a little something that needs to be done. So regardless of your pre-approval amount, make sure you set limits for yourself. That's like, okay, if it's a fixer-upper, this is my max because I know I need to keep X amount in cash in order to fix up the property. But if it's more turnkey, I feel comfortable going up to this number. And again, run those monthlies and make sure that you're comfortable with those monthlies. You might think that you want a turnkey property, and the more you look and the more you do research, you might realize it might be worth it to go into more of a fixer-upper. Number 5, don't get discouraged. I literally do this for a living, and the first offer that we put on a house that didn't get rejected, I cried. I do this for a living and I cried. I was like, oh my God, this market sucks. People have so much cash. It's okay. It's gonna be okay. Take a deep breath. I know interest rates are high. I know houses don't cost $200,000 anymore. Some of the things that you see out there will make you question everything that you know. For example, I showed this house. They were asking like $590,000, advertised as a 3.2. This was the 2. This is a shed in the backyard. There's your toilet, and there's your shower head. That is a full bathroom. Someone bought it. They paid $550,000 for it. Anyway, don't get discouraged. You're gonna find the right house that's for you. Make sure you have a really good lender and a really good agent who can not only help you with the financial and contractual side of things, but also with the times that you're like, this sucks, I'm not gonna buy a house ever, the world sucks, everyone hates me. They will be able to bring you back down and help you take a deep breath and remind you that you're gonna find the right house.
Here's how I bought my first property in Australia by the age of 24, all by myself. And this is coming from someone like me who's now 25 years old, has a 7-figure investment portfolio, and gets paid rent money like this on a regular basis. So the first step, and the step that everyone struggles with, is saving up for a deposit. So the way that I saved up for a deposit was saving as much money as I could when I was about 19 years old, but also using that saved up money and investing it into the stock market so it's growing as well. At 19 years old, I started and invested $5,000 into the NASDAQ 100, which returns around 13.65% every single year. I lived well below my means and tried to make as much money as possible, and after 5 years of doing this, I was able to save up $182,000 by the end of it all. I was able to use this $182,000 to put down as a deposit for an investment property with the help of a buyer's agent, and that property was actually making me $650 per week off rent. And if you want to know how I went from my first property all the way to a 7-figure investment portfolio by the age of 25, make sure you follow for more.
If you're a first home buyer and your first home is going to be an apartment, I wanted to give you some encouragement to say, keep going and you're doing the right thing. So often as a buyer's advocate, I hear first home buyers getting to an apartment is often frowned upon or maybe not encouraged by family and friends because it's just an apartment. But the reality is the Melbourne property market is so inflated that entry-level properties are 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. They offer lifestyle, they give you a sense of community, they have a lot of pros to them. Even though they might be smaller than a house, not all of us are millionaires and can afford big homes in the suburbs. So if you've been house hunting and feeling a bit deflated or a bit deterred by other people's commentary about you shouldn't buy an apartment, it's not a good investment, Take it from me, as a buyer's advocate who helps lots of people buy apartments and great apartments, you just need to know a lot of things when it comes to buying the right apartment to make it a really good choice for your situation. And a hot tip from me on buying a great apartment, try and make sure it's in a boutique block, but more specifically, try and ensure the apartment has some element of value add, whether you could paint the walls or change the flooring or change the window furnishings to make it a bit lighter, brighter, neat and sellable when it comes time to maybe upsize or rent it out. Just ensure that you're adding value to the apartment and also enjoy living there and doing the upgrades to make it more suitable for you. If you're feeling a bit overwhelmed with the apartment buying process and you have some questions, comment them below. I'll be sure to answer them in a TikTok for you and hopefully you can buy your apartment sooner.
Let me tell you about saving $40,000 to buy my first home in Melbourne, 9 kilometres from the CBD, to buy a 1 of 3 villa unit. I'm in the middle. It's a 2-bed, 1 bath. It's got a garage, a separate laundry and a courtyard. So over the time of saving, I think I was making around $76,000 to around $80,000. And for the saving at the start, I lived at home, which was great. Obviously a really big privilege and was very, very helpful. And then I actually ended up moving out for about a year, a bit over, into a share house with 5 other people and mostly their partners most of the time. So that was fun. But that helped me save a lot as well. When I actually bought the property, I literally had $40,000. Like, I'm pretty sure I was like settling on the property and I had like $38,000 and I like needed more. And I was like getting paid and being like, I cannot spend any of this pay, and then getting paid. And like for the last probably like couple of months, I was like, you cannot spend $1. Like those last few weeks, I was going to Aldi being like, I can spend $30. Like, how can I feed myself for the next week? And then the whole place needed a reno. So like I did a longer settlement, so about 90 days of settlement. And in that time, like I saved every dollar I possibly could because I knew I was going to have to move in and do like a whole big reno. It was a bit of a catastrophe. But yeah, we got there. Not what I would recommend buying with like exactly the deposit you need, but it got me into my first home, so it was worth the kind of risk.
This is how much deposit you'll need for buying an established home versus building a home. Now let's assume that you're an Australian citizen, Australian permanent resident, and you're a first home buyer. And let's say both purchase prices are $550,000, which is like the average purchase price for first home buyer. So straight up, you're going to need a 5% deposit. So this is $27,500. Now both will be applicable to the first home guarantee scheme where you're paying no LMI or no lender's mortgage insurance. So there's going to be some fees. So these fees for your settlement agent, your council rates, your loan establishment fees, and your title transfer fees. Now, when you're buying an established property, you're going to need to pay some stamp duty. And for this, you're going to need $20,140. And when you're building your first home, you don't pay any stamp duty. So total deposit for buying an established home is $51,140. And when you're building your first home, you get given the first homeowner's grant of $10,000. So let's deduct that. Your total deposit in is $21,150. Now you can see why a lot of first home buyers do turn towards building, because the deposit is essentially half of what it is when you're buying an established property. And you basically don't get any other incentives other than the first homeowner scheme when you're buying an established property. And not to mention there's very little stock on the market for established properties right now. So that's also pushing a lot of people into building. So if you'd like to find out if you would qualify for your own home, you can just head to the link in my bio, fill out the questionnaire, and I can chat to you from there. Ciao.
So guys, should you buy a house or an apartment for your first home? This is a very common question I get asked. A lot of people have a stigma against buying apartments because obviously homes do grow in value more. I want to just sort of weigh it up for a first home buyer. Let's say you were to look at buying a house in the suburbs, probably in an area less desirable for you, as in not as close to the city. Let's say in this instance you're looking at a purchase price of $900,000. In that instance, there's no stamp duty concessions, there's no first home buyer concessions. So you'd be looking at a full stamp duty of $49,500. And assuming you put in a 20% deposit, your mortgage repayment is going to be $4,382 per month, that's a big boy. That's a lot of repayment, and you've now forfeited any first home buyer benefits because you've already bought your first home. Now let's flip it and let's say you buy an apartment for $600K. In this instance, you're going to live in an apartment, not going to grow as much in value compared to the house, but you're going to live closer to the city, most likely, probably an area that you probably prefer to live in versus living in the suburbs, you're going to have zero stamp duty. So straight away you're saving a lot of money, and a mortgage repayment, assuming you put in a 20% deposit, approximately $2,922. Much more manageable. Should you do this or this? It's going to depend on your circumstances, but a great idea, which I've seen some people do, settle for an apartment first, take advantage of the $0 stamp duty because it's under 600k, later convert that into an investment property and then buy your second home. There's pros and cons of both, but I kind of like this idea for some people. Just an idea to consider. Don't be so against apartment living if you're a first home buyer. There's a lot of benefits.
If I was a first home buyer, this is the kind of property that I'd be looking at. Be mindful of properties like this. In my last video, you were also onto it. It was the exact same building and you said that there had been issues with the body corp, which is why the property might have been cheap. So if there is a body corporate involved, the very first thing that I would always tell my clients is make sure you ask if there's been any issues, make sure you check the building and also the sinking fund that's available as well. If a property seems cheap or if there's a couple in the building for sale, then there may be a reason for it. So first home buyers, hit that follow button so I can teach you more about buying a property.